The summons arrived while Dr. Garrett Thorne was calibrating sensors that mapped consciousness patterns in non-human species. He had been 3 days into isolation at the orbital research station, enjoying the particular silence that came from being alone with instruments that never argued back. The coffee synthesizer hummed its familiar complaint about his preference for bitter over balanced. He was composing a response involving thermodynamics and personal freedom when every display in the lab went dark. Then the lights returned, but wrong, softer, bluer. The air itself seemed to thicken with intention. His wrist console chimed once. The message was brief. Declining was not presented as an option. That alone told Garrett this would be unlike any scientific consultation he had accepted before. Normal consultations did not reroute 3 orbital traffic lanes. They did not deploy escort vessels that looked less like ships and more like living sculptures of crystallized light. 4 hours later, standing in a chamber that felt as though it had been grown rather than built, Garrett understood that normal had become a concept from his past. The walls curved with organic patience. Translucent layers pulsed with faint bioluminescence, as if the structure itself possessed a slow and thoughtful heartbeat. The gravity here sat lighter on his shoulders, apologetic in its touch, like a host who understood their guests came from heavier worlds. Garrett adjusted his jacket and immediately regretted the choice. Coffee stains marked the sleeve. If he was about to meet whatever power could summon him across star systems with a single untranslatable command, he would have preferred to arrive looking less like a man who argued with appliances. The guards flanking him belonged to the Athari, tall figures willowy in their proportions, with limbs that suggested grace over strength. Their ears rose long and elegant, tapering back along their skulls like permanent expressions of attention. Their faces carried a serenity that unnerved him more than hostility ever could. He had read about the Athari, of course, precognitive, philosophical, capable of seeing futures the way most species saw weather patterns, distant but inevitable. No one smiled, no one threatened. The silence held weight. Garrett was guided forward through passages that adjusted their dimensions as he moved as though the architecture anticipated his path and made accommodation. He arrived at a raised platform and was left alone. The quiet stretched. He cleared his throat, regretted it immediately, and clasped his hands behind his back in what he hoped communicated harmlessness and potential utility. Then she appeared. Queen Isolde did not enter the chamber so much as manifest within it. She stepped through a veil of refracted light that parted around her like a curtain of respectful awareness. At first glance, she could have been human. Tall, composed, features shaped by restraint rather than softness. But the ears marked her unmistakably Athari, as did her eyes. Those eyes held depths Garrett associated with people who had already lived through conversations before they began, who knew the weight of words before they were spoken. Her presence pressed against the room, not with force, with certainty. Garrett's mind supplied several observations at once. She looked like someone who could silence chaos without raising her voice. She carried authority the way some people carried scars as evidence of survival, and he had absolutely no idea what she wanted from him. Queen Isolde studied him with an expression that revealed nothing and promised everything. "You are Dr. Garrett Thorne," she said. Her voice moved through the chamber like water finding its level calm and entirely uninterested in being questioned. "I am," Garrett replied, then added usually, "unless this concerns unpaid docking fees, in which case I may need to reconsider my identity." A pause followed. For a brief moment, Garrett wondered if humor translated poorly across species. Then something shifted in Isolde's expression. Not quite a smile. More like the acknowledgement that a smile could exist here if circumstances allowed. "You study life," she said. "Consciousness in forms unlike your own." "Yes," Garrett said quickly, in a respectful and non-invasive way. "I promise I have never dissected anything capable of filing a complaint." Another pause. This one felt heavier, as though the air itself had decided to pay closer attention. Isolde raised her hand. An attendant stepped forward, moving with the fluid precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment in their mind countless times. The attendant carried a thin stack of translucent sheets that shimmered faintly in the chamber's light. Isolde accepted them, her fingers careful, and looked at Garrett again with a focus that made his skin feel too thin. "My daughter draws," Isolde said. Garrett nodded, uncertain why this statement arrived with the weight of accusation. That's good. Creative expression is healthy for cognitive development. She has been drawing you, Isolde continued. The room seemed to tilt, just slightly, just enough. Garrett let out a laugh that sounded wrong even to his own ears. I'm flattered truly, but I should mention I don't usually inspire artistic interest. Mild confusion occasionally. Indigestion once, but not art. Isolde extended the translucent sheets toward him. Garrett took them with hands that had decided to betray him through trembling. The images were simple in execution, unmistakably the work of a child, but the subject matter carried no such innocence. It was him, standing in unfamiliar rooms, wearing clothes he did not own, speaking with figures whose long ears marked them as Athari. One drawing showed him holding a device he had not yet conceived, let alone constructed. Another depicted a small Athari child tugging impatiently at his sleeve with the familiarity of long acquaintance. The most unsettling aspect was not the accuracy, though, that alone warranted alarm. It was the casualness. The artist had drawn him the way one drew a favorite chair, a family pet, something familiar and expected, and utterly ordinary. I have never been here before, Garrett said quietly. I have never met your daughter. I do not even particularly like children. They ask too many questions and possess no sense of conversational boundaries. My daughter, Isolde said, and now he could hear it, the tightness beneath her controlled surface, began drawing you 8 years ago. Garrett swallowed. His mind raced through theories, temporal resonance, quantum entanglement across conscious observers, probability echoes bleeding through dimensional barriers. But none of them explained why a child would render him with such bored familiarity as though he were already part of her daily life. How? Isolde asked, and the question carried more than curiosity. It carried the weight of a mother who had watched her daughter fill sketchbooks with a stranger's face for nearly a decade. How does my daughter know you? Garrett looked down at the drawings again, at a future that seemed to have already scheduled him without consultation. He managed what he hoped was a reassuring smile, though it felt weak on his face. I would very much like to know that myself, he said, preferably before this situation becomes more complicated. The corridor stretched and curved with geometries that seemed to shift based on intention rather than engineering. Garrett was escorted through passages where light rippled through the translucent surfaces in slow patterns, as if the palace itself breathed with patient contemplation. He counted his steps initially, then abandoned the effort when the numbers refused to behave according to any mathematical system he recognized. The guards walked slightly ahead, their silence suggesting this was normal. That summoning strangers to answer impossible questions happened with enough regularity to warrant established protocols. The doors ahead opened without touch or command, revealing a chamber that felt more intimate than the throne room. Yattered cushions made from pale, fibrous material. Low tables with surfaces that shifted like liquid thought. A wide window overlooking a city that flowed outward in organic patterns, as though urban planning had been achieved through cultivation rather than construction. And in the center of the room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was a child. She looked up as he entered. Her ears twitched with interest, catching sounds Garrett could not hear. She had her mother's eyes, too old for her face, but unlike the queen, she smiled freely. Bright, unapologetic. You're late, she said. Garrett stopped walking. Slowly, carefully. I beg your pardon. You're later than last time, the child continued, tilting her head in examination. But earlier than the other time. It confuses the sequence. Garrett glanced behind him, half expecting to find another version of himself standing there, perhaps better dressed and more prepared. There was no one. You must be Everin, he said. She nodded enthusiastically. Yes, you remembered. That is good. That is generally how names work, Garrett said. People remember them after being told. Everin frowned at him with open disappointment. That is not what I meant. Before he could ask for clarification, she was on her feet, circling him with slow, appraising steps. Garrett resisted the urge to turn in place, settling instead for staring at the wall and hoping dignity would carry him through whatever assessment was occurring. You look more tired this time, Everin said, and your hair is wrong. My hair has been wrong for 36 years, Garrett replied automatically. It is a well-documented issue. She hummed, unconvinced, then stopped directly in front of him and peered up into his face with uncomfortable proximity. He could see faint, luminescent freckles along her cheeks, pulsing softly like tiny stars embedded in her skin. "You are real," she said. "That is good." Garrett exhaled. "I assure you I have been real for my entire life. There is documentation, birth certificates, academic transcripts, parking violations." Everin giggled. The sound echoed strangely in the chamber, as if the room itself enjoyed the joke. The door behind them opened. Queen Isolde entered, her expression carefully neutral, though Garrett was beginning to recognize the small signs of tension in the set of her shoulders. "She has been waiting," Isolde said. "I can tell," Garrett said. "She has already provided feedback on my appearance." "He is nicer when he is confused," Everin announced proudly. Isolde closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, the queen had returned, though something softer lingered beneath the authority. "Everin," she said gently, "tell me what you told me before." Everin sighed dramatically. "You always make me repeat the boring parts." "This is important," Isolde replied. "It is always important," Everin muttered, then looked back at Garrett. Her gaze sharpened, shifting into something older, more focused. The change was subtle but unmistakable, like a room going quiet before a storm arrives. "I see you," Everin said, "in the places where things go wrong, not because you break them, because you do not fit." Garrett opened his mouth, then closed it. He decided the honesty might serve better than deflection. "I do not fit in most places," he said, "Earth included." Everin nodded solemnly. "Exactly." Isolde stepped closer, her presence filling the space between them. "When do these visions occur?" she asked, her voice gentle but edged with the need for precision. Everin shrugged. "All the time. Sometimes before they happen, sometimes after, sometimes at the same time. Time is very bad at standing still." Garrett blinked. "You know," he said slowly, "we have entire academic disciplines dedicated to arguing about that precise observation." "Then they are also late," Everin said cheerfully. Despite everything, despite the impossibility of the situation and the weight of implications he could not yet calculate. Garrett laughed. It came out shaky, but genuine. "You are saying you have been seeing me for years," he said. "Yes," Everin replied. "You talk more later. And you complain about food." "I already do that," Garrett said. "That is not evidence of precognition." Isolde studied him, her eyes searching for something beyond his words. "She does not predict events," she said quietly. "She remembers possibilities." Garrett felt cold understanding crawl up his spine. Memory implied experience. Experience implied causality. And causality was not supposed to work in loops. "I am just a xenobiologist," he said quietly. "I do not command fleets. I do not invent miracles. I once broke a translation device by sneezing on it." "That was very funny," Everin said. "You apologized to it." Garrett winced. "I have manners." Isolde regarded him for a long moment, then turned toward the window looking out over her city. The structures below pulsed with gentle light, beautiful and fragile in the way only advanced civilizations ever managed. "The Athari have trusted the future for generations," she said. "We see paths. We choose the least harmful. But now my daughter sees something different, someone unpredictable." Garrett followed her gaze. The city spread beneath them like a living tapestry. "Unpredictable is not usually considered a compliment where I come from," he said. Isolde turned back to him. "It is when the future stops moving." Silence settled again, but this time it felt less like judgment and more like the moment before a decision crystallizes into action. Everin broke it by tugging on Garrett's sleeve. "You are going to stay," she said. "That was not phrased as a question," Garrett noted. "You never leave in the drawings," Everin replied simply. He looked at Isolde. The queen did not deny it. Before Garrett could respond, the chamber's ambient light flickered. Once. Twice. The translucent surfaces seemed to shudder as though the building itself had felt a tremor in its foundation. Isolde's expression shifted instantly to alarm. She moved to the window, pressing her hand against the transparent surface. Outside, the city's gentle pulsing had become erratic. Lights flared and dimmed without pattern. In the distance, structures seemed to phase their edges, blurring, as though reality itself had lost focus. The door burst open. A figure strode in, tall and severe, wearing robes marked with symbols of authority. His ears bore small, crystalline ornaments that marked him as elder counsel. His face carried the particular exhaustion of someone who had seen too many crises and survived none of them unscathed. Garrett had read about Elder Cassian in the cultural briefings, a survivor of the last convergence 2 centuries ago when he lost both husband and daughter to the crisis. Since then, he had dedicated his existence to preventing another catastrophe, serving 3 queens across 200 years with unwavering commitment to safety above all else. The loss had carved something permanent into him, visible in the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he looked at Princess Everin with protective intensity that bordered on fear. "Your Majesty," Cassian said, and Garrett heard urgency beneath the formal address. "We have a situation." Isolde did not take her eyes from the city. "Elder Cassian, report." Cassian's gaze flicked to Garrett, then back to his queen. 3 deaths, citizens found in the lower districts. Their bodies were, he hesitated, phased. Medical examiners describe it as existing between states, as though their presence in reality was erased and rewritten simultaneously. Garrett felt his stomach drop. "When?" Isolde asked. "Over the past 6 hours, Cassian said. All 3 locations correlate with sites our guest visited since his arrival." Every eye in the room turned to Garrett. He raised his hand slowly. "I did not touch anyone. I barely spoke. I have been either in transit or in your presence since I arrived." "We know," Cassian said, and there was no accusation in his voice, only a terrible certainty. "That is what makes this worse. Your presence alone appears to be causing temporal instability. The precognitive networks are registering interference patterns. The city's infrastructure, which adjusts based on probabilistic forecasting, is encountering contradictions. And now, people are dying." Isolde turned from the window. "Cassian, you are suggesting—" "I am suggesting nothing, Your Majesty." Cassian interrupted, his voice tight. "I am reporting facts. This human's unpredictability is destabilizing our reality. Every moment he remains here, the interference grows." Garrett felt the weight of it then. Not guilt exactly. He had done nothing intentional, but responsibility nonetheless. 3 people were dead and his existence appeared to be the cause. "I will leave," he said quietly, "immediately. If my presence is causing this—" "No," Isolde said. The word cut through the chamber with absolute authority. Cassian stared at his queen. "Your Majesty, with respect, we cannot risk." "I said no," Isolde repeated. She moved from the window to stand between Garrett and Cassian. "We do not yet understand what is occurring. Removing him could make the situation worse." "How could it possibly be worse?" Cassian demanded, and for the first time Garrett heard the grief beneath the elder's control. 3 dead already. The convergence algorithms are showing probability cascades. If this continues—" He stopped himself, visibly wrestling with emotion. "Your Majesty, I cannot watch another convergence destroy what we have built. I cannot lose more people I have sworn to protect." "Not again." Isolde's expression softened slightly, acknowledging the pain. "I know what you lost, Cassian. I know what you fear. But fear is not a reason to reject understanding." "And the deaths?" Cassian asked. "Are those data points as well?" Isolde did not flinch. "They are tragedies, and we will honor them by learning why they occurred, not by making blind decisions from panic." The tension in the room crystallized into something sharp and fragile. Everin, who had been watching the exchange with her 2 old eyes, spoke quietly. "It is starting." All 3 adults turned to her. "What is starting, little one?" Isolde asked, her voice gentling instantly. Everin's gaze went distant, unfocused. When she spoke again, her voice carried a strange resonance, as though multiple versions of her were speaking in imperfect unison. "The 72 hours," she said, "the time when everything decides. You have to choose, Mother. Him or them. The path or the possibility. Safety or change." The chamber's light flickered violently. The translucent surfaces shuddered, their bioluminescence pulsing in arrhythmic patterns. Outside, the city's instability intensified. Structures phased in and out of visibility. The sky itself appeared to ripple, as though reality had become a pond disturbed by falling stones. Garrett felt it then, not physically, but something deeper, a sensation like standing on the edge of a cliff the moment before the wind decides whether to push or pull. Isolde knelt beside her daughter, taking the child's small hands in her own. Everin, look at me. The child's eyes focused, slowly returning from whatever distant place they had traveled. I am here, Isolde said softly. You are safe. Everin blinked, and suddenly she was just a child again, frightened and small. She threw her arms around her mother's neck. Cassian watched this with an expression Garrett could not quite read. Pain, perhaps. Memory of his own daughter lost to a convergence he could not prevent. He spoke quietly, his earlier anger replaced by something that sounded like grief. Your Majesty, I lost my family in the last convergence. My husband. My daughter. She was younger than Everin is now. He paused. I cannot watch another child suffer what she suffered. I cannot watch this civilization tear itself apart again. If there is even a chance that removing this human will prevent that, we must take it. Isolde looked up at Cassian, still holding her daughter. And if removing him causes exactly what we fear. If my daughter's visions are showing us not a threat to avoid, but a change we must embrace. That is a risk I am not willing to take, Cassian said. But it is my decision to make, Isolde replied, as queen, as the one who bears responsibility for all outcomes. Cassian bowed his head slightly, not in agreement. In acknowledgement of authority he could not override. He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. Council will convene within the hour. They will want answers, Your Majesty, and they will want safeguards. After he left, silence filled the chamber like water rising. Garrett stood frozen, aware that he had just witnessed something profound. A queen defending a choice that could doom her people. A mother protecting a daughter who saw too much. A civilization balanced on the edge of something it could not predict. Isolde stood slowly, Everin still clinging to her. She looked at Garrett, and he saw exhaustion in her eyes, but also determination. You asked earlier how my daughter knows you, she said. I do not have that answer yet, but I have learned in 12 years of ruling that some questions cannot be answered by avoiding them. What do you need from me? Garrett asked. Honesty, Isolde said, and patience. We will investigate this together. The deaths, the instability, the reason you appear in my daughter's visions. But you must understand the danger. Not just to you, to all of us. Garrett nodded. I understand. Do you? Isolde challenged. Because I am not certain I do. I am making decisions based on instinct rather than foresight. That is not how Ithari queens rule. It is not how we survive. Perhaps, Garrett said quietly, that is exactly why it needs to happen. Isolde studied him for a long moment. Then, surprising him, she smiled. Small, tired, but genuine. You are either very wise or very foolish, Dr. Thorne. I have not yet determined which. In my experience, Garrett said, the two are often difficult to distinguish. The chamber's light stabilized. Outside, the city's erratic pulsing began to slow, though it did not return to its former rhythm. Something had changed, something fundamental. Everin pulled back from her mother and looked at Garrett. You stayed, she said. I was not aware I had been given permission to leave, Garrett replied. You were not, Everin said. But you could have tried. You did not. She smiled at him then, and it was a child's smile, uncomplicated and warm. Garrett felt something shift in his chest. A small thing, but significant. He had spent his career studying life that thought differently than humans. Consciousness that operated on principles alien to his own understanding. He had always approached such study from the outside as an observer documenting phenomena from a safe distance. But here now he was not observing. He was participating. He was part of the phenomenon he was trying to understand. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt like he belonged to something larger than his own isolated curiosity. The future remained uncertain. The deaths remained unexplained. The danger remained real. But standing in that chamber with a queen who chose questions over answers and a child who saw him in possibilities. He had not yet lived. Garrett made a choice of his own. He would stay, not because he understood what was happening, but because understanding required presence, required risk, required the courage to exist in spaces that did not make sense. Outside, the city continued its strange new rhythm, learning to pulse with uncertainty instead of prediction. And inside, three people stood together at the beginning of something that none of them could see clearly, but all of them could feel approaching. The story had begun. not with answers, but with the far more dangerous gift of questions that demanded to be asked. The council chamber felt different from the rest of the palace. Where other rooms breathed and adjusted to the presence of their occupants, this space held rigid. The surfaces stood firm, unyielding, constructed from materials that predated the living architecture that had grown around it. Here the Athari made decisions that could not be unmade. Here certainty was forged from the raw material of foresight. Queen Isolde stood at the center, Garrett positioned slightly behind her left shoulder. Not as decoration, as statement. Around them, 12 council members arranged themselves in a precise circle, their robes marked with symbols representing different aspects of Athari governance. Elder Cassian stood opposite Isolde, his face carved from the same rigid authority as the chamber itself. 3 deaths, Cassian said, his voice carrying the weight of documentation rather than accusation. Temporal phasing, no precedent in our medical records, all occurring within proximity to the humans' movements through our city. A council member to Cassian's left spoke, her voice measured. The convergence algorithms are showing cascade patterns, probability threads fragmenting at exponential rates. If this continues for another 48 hours, we project systemic collapse. Another voicemail aged. The precognitive networks report interference they cannot parse. Citizens are experiencing vision fragmentation. Some report seeing multiple versions of the same moment occurring simultaneously. Isolde listened without interruption. She had learned in 12 years of rule that authority came not from speaking first, but from speaking last, from hearing all positions before revealing her own. "What is the council's recommendation?" she asked, though she already knew. Cassian met her eyes. Immediate removal of the destabilizing element. The human must be returned to Earth orbit. All physical materials he has contacted must be quarantined. Princess Everin must be placed under medical observation to stabilize her neural patterns. Medical observation, Isolde repeated. Define that term precisely, Elder Cassian. A pause. Slight. But she caught it. Sedation, Cassian said. Temporary. Until the convergence passes, instability returns. You mean containment, Isolde said quietly. You mean placing my daughter in a state where she cannot access her gifts, where she cannot see. For her safety, Your Majesty, another council member interjected. The visions are intensifying. Her neural patterns show stress levels approaching critical thresholds. Garrett shifted slightly behind her. Isolde felt his presence there, solid and strange. An anchor point in a conversation that threatened to pull her under. I hear the council's concerns, Isolde said. They are noted, they are understood, but I will not make this decision from a place of fear. Fear keeps us alive, Cassian said. Fear kept us surviving, Isolde corrected. There is a difference. She let that statement settle before continuing. Jahri Thorn will remain, under my direct supervision. We will investigate the cause of these disturbances together. My daughter will not be sedated unless her life is in immediate danger. This is my decision as queen. The chamber filled with the particular silence that followed declarations no one could challenge, but many wished to. Your Majesty, Cassian said carefully, I must ask if personal attachment is influencing royal judgment. Isolde smiled. It was not a warm expression. Personal attachment has been influencing my judgment since the moment my daughter was born, Elder Cassian. It taught me that some things matter more than certainty, more than survival. If that makes me unfit to rule, the council may call for my removal. But until that moment, my decisions stand. No one called for her removal. They adjourned in tense silence. The archive sanctums lay beneath the palace, accessible through passages that descended in slow spirals. Garrett followed Isolde down stairs that adjusted their depth based on the walker's stride, making the descent feel both endless and immediate. The air grew cooler as they moved deeper, carrying the particular density of spaces where history accumulated weight. You did not have to defend me, Garrett said quietly. I was not defending you, Isolde replied without turning. I was defending my authority to make choices the council cannot predict. That seems like a dangerous precedent for a civilization built on foresight. Yes, Isolde agreed. It does. They reached the archive entrance. Doors formed from crystallized memory swung open at Isolde's approach, recognizing her presence through means Garrett could not identify. Inside, the sanctum stretched vast and luminous. Surfaces lined with records that glowed softly, their patterns shifting like slow thoughts made visible. These are moments, Isolde said, gesturing to the displays. Convergence points where our civilization's future narrowed, where choices were made that determined whether we survived or fell. She moved to a central console, her hands moving through holographic interfaces that responded to her touch like living things. Images began to coalesce in the air between them. Historical records, ancient and precise. Show me humans, Isolde commanded the archive. Cross-reference with convergence events. The system responded. Light reorganized itself into 5 distinct groupings, 5 faces, 5 humans spanning 8 centuries of Aethari history. Garrett stared at them. Different features, different clothing, but something similar in their expressions. A particular kind of confusion mixed with determination. They appeared during crisis points, Isolde said, studying the records. Moments when our foresight showed multiple catastrophic outcomes with no clear path to survival. She gestured and the first record expanded. A human woman young with dark hair and fierce eyes. Text scrolled beside her image in Aethari script that Garrett's translation implant rendered into English. Dr. Sarah Kingston appeared during the genetic plague convergence. Another record came forward. A human male older with weathered features and military bearing. Commander James Morrison. The Stellar Migration Crisis. Another. Rebecca Foster. The Technological Schism. Another. Michael Anderson. The Resource Wars. The final record showed a young man barely more than a boy with kind eyes and uncertain posture. David Peterson. The Last Convergence. 200 years ago. Garrett moved closer to the displays, his scientific training overriding his discomfort. They were all removed, all of them. Not removed, Isolde said quietly. Expelled, contained, erased from our timeline through various means. She gestured and the records expanded, showing outcomes. Sarah Kingston, placed in temporal stasis. Civilization survived the plague by sacrificing 20% of their artistic heritage. Cultural records showed a marked decrease in creative expression that lasted 3 generations. James Morrison forcibly returned to Earth. The stellar migration was completed, but advances in spatial engineering ceased for a century. Fear of instability had become fear of innovation. Rebecca Foster, contained in an isolated facility until the crisis passed. The technological schism ended with Aethari society choosing stagnation over risk. Progress stopped. Michael Anderson expelled after 3 days. The resource wars concluded with Aethari establishing such strict conservation protocols, met population growth halted for 50 years. David Peterson. Isolde's hand hesitated over this final record. She opened it slowly as though the information inside might escape if given the chance. The images showed a boy who could not have been more than 19. Human. Refined. Holding the hand of a small Aethari child who was drawing him with fierce concentration. The previous queen's daughter, Isolde said softly. Princess Liara. She drew him for 5 years before he appeared. Just like Everin. Garrett saw it then in the records. The desperate meetings. The council's demands. The queen's resistance that eventually crumbled under the weight of civilization's survival. David Peterson was expelled. Returned to Earth through means that severed his connection to Aethari space permanently. The convergence passed. Aethari survived. But Princess Liara never drew again. Never spoke again for 7 years. When she finally did speak, it was only to ask if David was coming back. He never did. The records showed that Liara died young. No specific cause listed. Just a slow fading as though part of her had been amputated and the wound never healed. They survived, Garrett said quietly. Every time your people survived. Yes, Isolde said, we survived. But look at the pattern. Look at what we lost each time. She gestured and the archive displayed a comprehensive timeline. After each expulsion, after each choice to remove the variable, Aethari civilization contracted. Not collapsed, but diminished. Lost color. Lost spontaneity. Lost the capacity for surprise. We optimized for survival, Isolde said, and in doing so we narrowed ourselves. Each convergence we chose safety over uncertainty. Each time we became less, smaller, more fragile. Until you could not handle any uncertainty at all, Garrett finished. Until 3 deaths from temporal phasing, are enough to threaten everything we have built, Isolde confirmed. She turned to face him fully. I am standing where 5 queens before me stood, facing the same choice they faced. And I see what their choices created. A civilization so dependent on foresight that a single unpredictable element causes reality itself to fracture. What do you want to do? Garrett asked. Isolde's expression shifted, something harder entering her eyes. I want to choose differently. I want to believe my daughter's visions are showing us not a threat to avoid, but a change we must embrace. And if you are wrong, Garrett asked gently, if I am the threat they fear I am, then I will have failed, Isolde said simply. As a queen, as a mother, as someone who thought she could change a pattern 8 centuries old. She paused. But I would rather fail trying something new than succeed at repeating the same diminishment. Garrett felt the weight of her conviction. This was not a woman operating from blind faith. This was someone who had studied the data, calculated the risk, and chosen the uncertain path because the certain one led only to slow extinction. What do you need from me? He asked, and help me understand why you are here, Isolde said. I want the mechanism, the purpose. 5 humans across 800 years, all appearing when we face existential crisis. That cannot be coincidence. You think someone or something is sending us, Garrett said. I think my daughter is bringing you, Isolde replied. The question is why. Before Garrett could respond, the archive's ambient light flickered. Once, twice. Isolde's hand went to her wrist console immediately. Her expression shifted to alarm. What is it? Garrett asked. Everin, Isolde said, already moving toward the exit. Her neural readings are spiking. They ran. The medical wing existed in a state of controlled urgency when they arrived. Technicians moved with practiced precision around equipment that monitored the princess's vital signs. Everin lay on a raised platform, her small body surrounded by holographic displays showing neural patterns that pulsed with chaotic intensity. Isolde went to her daughter, immediately taking the child's hand. Everin's eyes were open, but unfocused, seeing something beyond the room's physical boundaries. What happened? Isolde demanded of the attending physician. The physician, an older Ithari with gentle eyes and firm manner, consulted her readouts. The visions intensified approximately 20 minutes ago. She is experiencing what we can only describe as temporal simultaneity. Her consciousness is not moving through time linearly. It is experiencing multiple timelines at once. Can you stabilize her? Isolde asked, though Garrett heard the edge of desperation beneath her controlled tone. Not without sedation, the physician said quietly. Your Majesty, her neural pathways are overloading. If this continues for more than 48 hours, the damage will become permanent. She will either lose consciousness entirely or exist in a permanent state of fractured perception. Garrett moved closer, studying the displays. His xenobiology training allowed him to parse some of the data. What he saw made his chest tighten. She is not just seeing different futures, he said. She is experiencing them, living them simultaneously. Correct, the physician confirmed. It is as though her consciousness exists in superposition, present in all states at once, unable to collapse into a single timeline. Isolde's hand tightened around her daughter's. Everin, can you hear me? The child's eyes moved slightly. Her lips formed words, but the voice that emerged carried that same unsettling resonance Garrett had heard earlier. Multiple versions of Everin, speaking in imperfect harmony. I see you choosing mother in 17 different ways, in 43, in hundreds. So many versions of now, all trying to exist together. Come back to this version, Isolde said gently. Come back to me. Here. Now. I do not know how, Everin whispered. They are all now. They are all here. The door to the medical wing opened. Elder Cassian entered, his expression grave. Behind him, 2 council members. Their presence felt like judgment, manifesting in physical form. Your Majesty, Cassian said, we have been monitoring the situation. We have a proposal. Isolde did not look away from her daughter. I am listening. We have prepared a stasis chamber, Cassian said carefully, similar to what was used for Sarah Kingston. It will contain the princess's consciousness, prevent the visions from continuing to fragment her neural patterns. She will sleep through the convergence. Wake when stability returns. No, Isolde said immediately. Your Majesty, please consider. I said no, Isolde repeated, her voice hardening. I know what happened to Princess Lyara after she was contained. I will not do that to my daughter. Princess Lyara's situation was different, one of the council members said. The containment was maintained too long. We have learned from that mistake. This would be temporary, 48 hours at most. 48 hours in stasis, Garrett interjected quietly, with no guarantee that waking will be easy, or that she will wake as herself. Cassian turned to him not with hostility, but with tired honesty. Dr. Thorne, I do not blame you for this. You did not ask to be here, but your presence is killing her. Can you not see that every moment you remain, the temporal interference increases? Her mind is trying to process futures that include you, and our reality cannot accommodate that level of uncertainty. That is not his fault, Isolde said. I did not say it was, Cassian replied. I said it was fact, and facts do not care about fault. They simply exist and demand response. Everin's hand twitched in her mother's grip. Her voice emerged again, weaker now. It hurts, Mother, seeing all of it at once. I do not know how to stop seeing. Isolde closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, Garrett saw something break inside her, not surrender, but recognition of impossible weight. How long until the containment causes permanent harm? Isolde asked the physician. Unknown, the physician admitted. We have only historical records. Princess Lyara's case suggests significant psychological trauma, but she was contained for 3 months, not 2 days. And if we do nothing, Isolde asked? Permanent neural damage within 48 hours, the physician said. Guaranteed. Isolde looked at her daughter, at the displays showing consciousness fragmenting across infinite possibilities, at the small face twisted in pain from seeing too much. Then she looked at Garrett. He saw the question in her eyes, the one she could not ask aloud, the one that would break her to speak. Should I sacrifice you to save her? Garrett opened his mouth to respond, but Everin's voice cut through the moment. Do not send him away, she whispered. Please, Mother. If he leaves, we go back. Back to narrowing. Back to dying slowly. I would rather hurt now than fade forever. You do not know what you are asking, Isolde said, her voice cracking. I do, Everin replied. I see it. All the versions where he stays and all the versions where he goes. The ones where he goes are quieter, safer, smaller. She focused her fractured gaze on her mother's face. I do not want to be smaller, Mother, even if it hurts. The medical wing fell into silence so complete that Garrett could hear his own heartbeat, could hear Isolde's breath catching, could hear the faint hum of equipment measuring a child's pain in precise increments. Cassian spoke, his voice gentle now, almost pleading. Your Majesty, she is 8 years old. She cannot make this decision. That is why we have mothers, why we have queens, to make the choices children cannot bear to make. Isolde stood slowly. She kissed her daughter's forehead, then turned to face Cassian and the council members. You are right, she said. My daughter cannot make this decision. But neither can you. This is mine to carry. And what do you choose? Cassian asked. Isolde's answer hung suspended for a moment, the weight of 8 centuries pressing down on a single word. Nothing, she said. Tonight I choose nothing. I sit with my daughter. I monitor her condition. Tomorrow, if she worsens, we reassess. But I will not make permanent decisions from panic. That is not leadership, a council member said. That is delay. That is all I have to offer, Isolde replied, because every instinct I possess as a mother and every lesson I have learned as a queen are at war inside me. And I will not choose while that war remains unresolved. She looked at Cassian. You may stay if you wish. Monitor the situation, but I will not be moved from this room tonight. And neither will Dr. Thorne. We face this together or we do not face it at all. Cassian studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. I will remain, he said, not because I agree with your choice, but because someone must witness what comes next. The hours stretched like pulled glass, thin and fragile and ready to shatter. Garrett sat in a chair that had grown itself from the floor at Isolde's command. He watched the displays, watched Everin's neural patterns spike and settle and spike again. Watched a child's mind trying to exist in too many states at once. Isolde never left her daughter's side. She held Everin's hand, spoke to her in soft tones, told stories about nothing in particular, just the sound of a mother's voice anchoring a child to a single present moment. Cassian stood near the door, his presence a silent reminder of consequences waiting to manifest. Around 3 in the morning by Garrett's internal clock, Everin fell into something resembling sleep. The neural spikes decreased, not stopping, but easing. Isolde sagged with visible relief. "You should rest," Garrett said quietly. "I cannot," Isolde replied. "If I close my eyes, I see her face. I see Princess Lyara's face from the records. I see my daughter becoming that. Silent, fading. Because I chose wrong." Garrett moved closer. He kept his voice low, aware of Cassian's presence. "You did not choose wrong," he said. "You chose not to choose. That is different." "Is it?" Isolde asked. "Or am I simply a coward who cannot bear to make the hard decision?" "You are a mother who refuses to sacrifice her child for other people's comfort," Garrett said. "That is not cowardice. That is the opposite." Isolde looked at him with exhausted eyes. "You do not have children, do you, Thorn?" "No," Garrett admitted. "Then you cannot understand," she said. Not unkindly, simply stating fact. The moment they place that child in your arms, you stop being the person you were. You become someone whose every decision is filtered through a single question. Will this keep them safe? Will this give them a future? And when those two things conflict, Garrett asked, then you tear yourself apart trying to find a third option, Isolde said, because the alternative is unthinkable. She leaned back, her hand still holding Everin's. "I have been queen for 12 years, she said. I have made decisions that affected billions, guided civilization through disasters that could have ended us. And all of it, every choice felt manageable compared to this. Because this time the consequences are personal," Garrett said. "Because this time I cannot see the outcome," Isolde corrected. "For the first time in my life, I am acting without foresight, choosing based on feeling rather than knowledge. And it terrifies me more than any convergence ever could." She turned to look at him fully. "That is what you represent, Dr. Thorne. Not chaos, not danger, but the end of certainty. And I am starting to believe that might be exactly what we need, even if it kills us." Garrett had no response to that. He sat in silence, watching a queen wrestle with impossible choices while her daughter dreamed fractured dreams in the space between timelines. Outside, the city continued its stuttering rhythm, reality learning to pulse with uncertainty. And in the quiet of the medical wing, 3 people waited for dawn to bring either resolution or catastrophe. Neither came. What came instead was betrayal. Garrett woke to the sound of doors opening. He had not realized he had fallen asleep until consciousness returned with jarring suddenness. The medical wing's lighting had shifted to morning configuration, though he had no sense of how much time had passed. Isolde was on her feet instantly, positioning herself between Everin and the entrance. 6 guards entered. Their ceremonial robes marked them as royal security, but their formation spoke of determination rather than protection. Behind them, Elder Cassian. "What is this?" Isolde demanded, her voice sharp with authority and rising panic. "Forgive me, your majesty," Cassian said, and there was genuine regret in his voice. "The council convened during the night. We took a vote, 7-5. The decision was made." "What decision?" Isolde asked, though Garrett could see in her eyes that she already knew. "Princess Everin is to be placed in protective stasis," Cassian said, "for her safety and the safety of Aethari civilization. This is no longer a request. It is a mandate." "You have no authority," Isolde began. "We have every authority," Cassian interrupted gently. "Emergency protocols enacted during convergence events. When the ruling monarch's judgment is compromised by personal interest, the council may act to preserve the greater good." Isolde's hands curled into fists. "You are removing my authority to protect my daughter." "We are protecting your daughter despite your authority," Cassian corrected. "Your Majesty, please, do not make this harder than it must be. We respect you. We honor your service. But this decision is beyond any one person, even a queen." 2 guards moved toward Everin's platform. Isolde blocked them. "I will not allow this." "Then we will be forced to remove you from this room," Cassian said. "Please do not make us do that." Garrett stood uncertain what role he could play, but unable to remain seated. Cassian's eyes flicked to him. "You are not part of this action. Please remain where you are." "She is 8 years old," Garrett said quietly. "You are imprisoning a child." We are saving a child, Cassian replied, from pain she cannot understand and a mother who cannot see past her own love to make rational choices. Isolde's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. If you touch my daughter Cassian, there will be consequences. I am prepared to face them, Cassian said, after she is safe. The guards moved again. This time Isolde tried to physically stop them. One guard caught her arms gently but firmly. She struggled, all royal composure abandoned in the face of maternal desperation. No, she said, the word breaking. Please, please do not do this. Everin woke. Her eyes opened, still fractured with visions, but focused enough to understand what was happening. She reached for her mother. Mother, I am here, Isolde said, still struggling against the guard's hold. I am right here, little one. They lifted Everin carefully from the platform. The child's small voice called out, frightened now. Mother, I do not want to sleep. Please do not make me sleep. I am not making you, Isolde said, her voice ragged. I am not allowing this. They are taking you against my will. Do you hear me, Everin? This is not my choice. The guards carried the child toward the door. Everin twisted in their grip, reaching back toward her mother with desperate hands. Mother, please. Isolde finally broke free from the guard holding her. She lunged forward, but two more guards intercepted her. She fought them with a fury Garrett had not imagined the composed queen capable of. Release me, she commanded, her voice carrying every ounce of royal authority she possessed. I am your queen. I order you to release me and return my daughter. We serve Ethari civilization, Your Majesty, one guard said quietly. Sometimes that means protecting you from choices you cannot bear to make. They carried Everin through the door. The child's cries echoed through the corridor. Isolde stood frozen for a moment, held by guards who looked as miserable as she felt. Then she threw her head back and screamed. Not words, just sound. Pure maternal anguish given voice. The sound cut through Garrett like physical pain. When the guards released her, Isolde collapsed. Not falling, folding. Her strength simply leaving her body all at once. Garrett moved to her side, kneeling next to her. They took her, Isolde whispered. They took my daughter. Yes, Garrett said quietly. I failed her. No, Garrett said firmly. They betrayed you. There is a difference. Isolde looked up at him with eyes that held nothing but devastation. Tell me what to do, she said. Please, I am a queen who sees futures, and right now I cannot see anything past this moment. Garrett helped her stand. We get her back. How? I do not know, Garrett admitted, but we start by finding out where they took her. Isolde's expression shifted. The devastation remained, but something harder entered her eyes. Something that had been forged in the previous minutes and emerged as something new. The containment facility, she said. Central District, 3 levels below ground. Can we access it? Garrett asked. I am still queen, Isolde said, her voice steadying. Until the council formally removes me, my authority stands. And they have not removed me. They have simply chosen to ignore me. She straightened, pulling royal composure back around herself like armor. That was a mistake, she said quietly. They moved toward the door. Cassian stood there, his expression pained. Your Majesty, he said, please do not do something we will all regret. Isolde stopped in front of him. When she spoke, her voice carried ice. I already regret everything, Elder Cassian. I regret trusting the council to honor my authority. I regret believing we could face this challenge together. I regret not fighting harder when my daughter needed me. She stepped closer. But I do not regret what comes next. That will be entirely your burden to carry. She walked past him without waiting for response. Garrett followed, leaving Cassian standing alone in the medical wing, looking suddenly old and uncertain. The corridors shifted as they moved, but this time the architecture seemed to recognize Isolde's intent. Passages opened before them. The translucent surfaces curved to show the fastest path. The palace itself, built to serve the queen, chose her will over the council's mandate. They descended through levels that grew colder, harder. The living architecture gave way to older construction. Stone and metal instead of grown materials. This was the foundation, the original structure upon which everything else had been built. The containment facility entrance stood guarded. 4 security personnel. They stiffened as Isolde approached. Your Majesty, the lead guard said, we have orders. I am countermanding those orders, Isolde said. Open the facility. The guard hesitated. Your Majesty, Elder Cassian, was very specific. And I am your queen, Isolde interrupted. You will open this facility or I will have you removed from service. Choose quickly. The guards exchanged glances. Caught between opposing authorities, neither option safe. Garrett watched the decision crystallize in their faces. Watched them choose loyalty to the crown over loyalty to the council. The door opened. Inside the facility stretched clinical and cold. Energy fields hummed. Medical equipment lined the surfaces. And in the center, surrounded by monitors and containment technology, a small platform held Princess Everin. She was already unconscious. The stasis field wrapped around her, freezing her in a moment between awareness and oblivion. Isolde ran to her daughter. She placed her hands against the field, and the energy rippled at her touch. Everin, she whispered, I am here. I came for you. The child did not respond, could not respond. The stasis held her suspended, untouchable. Behind them, footsteps. Elder Cassian entered with council members and more guards. They stopped at a distance, creating a tableau of confrontation. Your Majesty, Cassian said, you cannot simply undo what has been done. The stasis is engaged. Interrupting it now could cause permanent harm. Isolde turned to face them. Her hands remained pressed against the field. You did this without my consent, she said. You took my daughter from my arms. You betrayed your queen. He saved Ethari civilization, or a council member replied. The convergence countdown has reached 36 hours. The temporal instability is accelerating. With the princess contained, the interference patterns are already stabilizing. At what cost? Isolde demanded. At the cost of one child's temporary discomfort, Cassian said. Measured against the survival of billions. That is not a difficult calculation, Your Majesty. For you, though, Isolde said, but you are not her mother. You do not have to live with the knowledge that you chose to imprison your daughter rather than trust her. She looked at the gathered council, at the guards at the facility that held her child in frozen suspension. I have stood where 5 queens before me stood, she said. I have faced the same choice they faced, and I have seen what their choices created. A civilization that survives by becoming smaller, narrower, less alive. Your Majesty, Cassian began. I am not finished, Isolde said, her voice carrying absolute command. You have made your choice. You have acted to save what you believe needs saving, but I am still queen, and I am making a different choice. She turned back to the containment field. Release my daughter, she said, now. Silence fell across the facility, heavy, final. Your Majesty, Cassian said quietly, the convergence can happen, Isolde finished. It can fracture reality. It can destroy everything we have built. Or it can transform us into something new, something that can live without constant fear. I do not know which outcome awaits, but I know that I will not build survival on the imprisonment of children. Not anymore. Not ever again. She placed both hands against the field. Release her, she repeated, or I will do it myself, regardless of consequences. The medical technician manning the containment controls looked at Cassian, looked at Isolde, caught in the same impossible position as the guards. If I disengage the field, the technician said carefully, the princess will wake. Her neural patterns will resume fragmenting. Within hours, the damage could become permanent. Then we will face that together, Isolde said, as mother and daughter, as we should have from the beginning. Garrett stepped forward. Your Majesty, there may be another option. Every eye turned to him. The convergence countdown. It accelerated when Everin was contained. What if the containment itself is the problem? What if trying to control the variable is exactly what makes the variable dangerous? That is speculation, a council member said. Everything about this situation is speculation, Garrett replied. You are operating from fear of the unknown while punishing the unknown for existing. That is not rational planning. That is panic with documentation. Cassian's expression hardened. Thorn, you have been patient and respectful throughout this crisis, but you are not Ethari. You cannot possibly understand what is at stake. I understand that you are repeating a pattern 8 centuries old, Garrett said, and expecting different results. That is not wisdom. That is the definition of madness. He looked at Isolde. You wanted to choose differently, he said. When was the moment that choice must be made? Not tomorrow, not after more committee meetings. Right now. Isolde held his gaze. She saw support there. Not certainty, not promises. Just the acknowledgement that some leaps must be taken without knowing where the landing will be. She turned back to the containment field. Release her, she commanded. That is a direct order from your queen. Disobey and face the consequences of your choice. The technician's hands trembled over the controls. Cassian spoke, his voice heavy with resignation. Do as the queen demands. Let it be recorded that the council advised against this action, that we offered alternatives, that we warned of the consequences. Recorded, another council member said quietly. The technician pressed the release sequence. The containment field shimmered, flickered, collapsed. Everin drew a sharp breath and opened her eyes. Outside the facility, somewhere in the city's infrastructure, alarms began to sound. A voice echoed through the facility's communication system. Automated, clinical. Convergence event acceleration detected. Revised timeline 36 hours to collapse. Isolde gathered her daughter into her arms, holding her close. Everin blinked, her eyes still fractured with visions, but present, aware. Mother, she whispered. I am here, Isolde said. I have you. I will not let go again. Everin wrapped small arms around her mother's neck, but the pain remained sharp and overwhelming. In the stasis field, she had been alone with the fractured timelines, forced to experience them without context or support. Now held in her mother's arms, surrounded by her mother's certainty, the multiplicity felt less like an attack and more like a phenomenon she could learn to navigate. It still hurts, Everin admitted, her voice small. But it hurts differently now. Before it felt like breaking. Now it feels like growing, like my mind is learning to be bigger than it was. Isolde pulled back slightly to look at her daughter's face. You can bear this. I think so, Everin said. With you here, I could not bear it alone, but together it feels possible. She looked at Garrett. You stayed too. That helps. Garrett smiled despite the gravity of the moment. Where else would I go? Isolde stood, lifting Everin with her. She looked at Cassian and the council. 36 hours, she said. We have 36 hours to either save our civilization or watch it fall. I suggest we stop fighting each other and start working together. Cassian met her eyes. He saw something in them he had not seen before. Not just determination, but clarity born from having already lost everything that mattered and discovered that breath still followed breath, that choice still remained, even after the worst had happened. He nodded slowly. As you command, Your Majesty. The facility fell quiet except for the sound of a mother's heart beating against her daughter's ear, steady and certain in a moment when nothing else remained sure. And high above, in the living architecture of the palace, the city held its breath, waiting to discover whether the choice made in that cold facility would save them or doom them. The convergence countdown continued its relentless march toward zero, and Princess Everin, held safe in her mother's arms, saw all possible outcomes shimmer in her fractured vision, each one equally real, each one demanding to exist. The end was coming, or the beginning. The difference between the two had become impossible to distinguish. The city above them screamed, not with sound, with existence itself contorting under pressure it was never designed to bear. Through the facility's surfaces, Garrett felt it, a vibration that moved through bone rather than air. Reality learning to shudder. Queen Isolde held her daughter while the alarms continued their clinical announcement of approaching catastrophe. Around them, council members stood frozen in the particular paralysis that comes from watching certainty dissolve. Elder Cassian broke the silence first. Your Majesty, he said, and his voice carried exhaustion that went beyond the physical. What do we do now? Isolde looked up from her daughter's face. When she spoke, her voice held the clarity that comes only after surviving the worst moment imaginable and discovering that breath still follows breath. Now, Poem, she said, we stop pretending we can control this. We stop trying to narrow possibilities into safety. We do what Athari have forgotten how to do. We adapt. She stood, Everin held close against her chest. The child's eyes remained fractured, seeing too many timelines at once, but she was present, awake, aware. Over the following hours, as they prepared for what came next, the pain gradually transformed, not disappearing that would take months, but shifting from crisis to challenge, from thing that would destroy her to thing she could learn to carry. Cashin Isolde continued, gather the full council, not for debate, for action. We have 36 hours to prepare our people for transformation, not destruction. I need every precognitive mind focused not on preventing the convergence, but on understanding it. Your Majesty, a council member protested, we cannot simply embrace chaos. We are not embracing chaos, Isolde interrupted. We are releasing our grip on a control that was always an illusion. There is a difference. She moved toward the facility exit and the gathered officials parted before her. Not with fear, with something closer to awe. They were witnessing a queen transformed a leader who had passed through the fire of impossible choice and emerged remade. Garrett followed his presence, no longer that of an outsider, but of a necessary element in an equation finally beginning to balance. They ascended through levels of the palace, and this time the architecture responded with something that felt almost like approval. The translucent surfaces pulsed with steadier light. The corridors straightened rather than shifted, as though the building itself recognized that hesitation had ended, that direction had been chosen. The great council chamber filled rapidly. Not just the 12 primary members, but advisors, scientists, historians, and precognitive analysts. Isolde had called for every mind that could contribute understanding regardless of rank or protocol. She stood at the chamber center, Everin beside her, so now the child's hand gripped firmly in her mother's. Garrett positioned himself at the periphery, present, witnessing. But knowing this moment belonged to the Athari to navigate. We have 36 hours, Isolde began without preamble. 36 hours until what we have called a convergence event reaches its apex. We have treated this as a threat to avoid. I am here to suggest we have been asking the wrong question. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. She raised her hand for silence. For 8 centuries, we have survived convergences by removing variables, by expelling humans who appeared during crisis points. And for 8 centuries, we have diminished, become smaller, more fragile. We have optimized for survival and lost the capacity to live. She gestured to the archive displays that lined the chamber surfaces. The images of 5 humans appeared the historical pattern she and Garrett had discovered. Each time we chose certainty over risk. Each time we survived. But look at what we lost. The display shifted, showing cultural indices declining across centuries. Art production, innovation rates, population diversity, emotional range recorded in psychological assessments, all trending downward in the wake of each convergence resolution. We have been dying slowly, Isolde said, calling it survival, convincing ourselves that smaller means safer. Elder Cassian stood. His voice carried weight, but not hostility. Your Majesty, no one disputes the cost of our choices, but the alternative was extinction, immediate and total. Surely slow decline is preferable to sudden annihilation. Is it? Isolde challenged. Because from where I stand, we are so fragile now that 3 deaths from temporal phasing threaten to shatter everything we have built. One human's presence causes our reality to fracture. That is not strength. That is a civilization on the edge of collapse, held together only by desperate control. She looked around the chamber, meeting eyes demanding engagement rather than passive reception. My daughter has been seeing Dr. Thorne for 8 years, drawing him. And every year her visions have grown clearer, more detailed, because she was not observing a future. She was constructing one. Everin spoke then, her young voice carrying through the chamber with unexpected strength. I need to tell everyone something, the princess said. I lied. The chamber fell silent. Not on purpose, Everin continued, but I thought I was seeing the future. I thought I was watching what would happen. But that is not how it works. Not for children, not for me. She looked up at her mother seeking permission. Isolde nodded. I was choosing, Everin said. Every time I drew him, I was inviting that timeline to exist. I was calling him here, across space and time, because I saw what we needed, what Mother needed, what all of us needed. Garrett felt something shift in his understanding, Not surprise exactly, more like pieces aligning into a pattern he had sensed but not articulated. The previous children, he said quietly, Princess Lyara and the others before her. They also invited the humans. Yes, Everin confirmed. They saw their civilization narrowing, saw their futures becoming smaller, and they reached out, called for change. But every time their mothers, the queens, chose to reject the invitation, chose safety over transformation. She squeezed her mother's hand. Until now. Isolde's voice emerged steady despite the emotion Garrett could see threatening to overwhelm her. My daughter is 8 years old, she said. She should not have to carry the burden of saving a civilization. She should be drawing pictures of ordinary things, playing with friends, learning the simple mathematics of childhood. But she has carried this weight for 8 years because we, the adults, the leaders, were too afraid to choose differently. She turned to face Cassian directly. You ask me what we do now, I will tell you. We honor my daughter's invitation. We stop trying to prevent Dr. Thorne's presence from affecting us. We allow it. We embrace the uncertainty he represents. And we trust that a civilization capable of surviving 800 years of convergences can survive becoming uncertain again. Your Majesty, a council member, said carefully, that is not a plan. That is a hope. Hope does not prevent temporal phasing. It does not stabilize fractured timelines. No, Isolde agreed. It does not. But control has not prevented those things either. Control has made us so rigid that any unexpected stress causes us to fracture. Perhaps flexibility, adaptation, uncertainty, perhaps those are what we need to survive this. Another council member stood, an older woman with kind eyes and deep worry lines. I lost my son in the last convergence, she said. He was a precognitive analyst. He saw the crisis coming and worked himself to exhaustion trying to prevent it. When the convergence passed and we survived, he could not recover. The weight of seeing disaster and barely avoiding it broke something inside him. He stopped speaking, stopped seeing, just stopped. She paused, composing herself. I have spent 200 years believing his sacrifice was necessary, that the price was worth paying. But listening to you now, Your Majesty, I wonder if we saved ourselves then only to condemn him and others like him to a different kind of death. Murmurs of recognition moved through the chamber, others nodding, others remembering their own losses, their own loved ones who survived the convergence only to be hollowed out by the weight of it. Isolde's expression softened. We have all paid prices we told ourselves were necessary. We have all made sacrifices we called noble. But perhaps the most dangerous sacrifice is the one we never question. The one we repeat because it worked before, never asking if worked means the same as was right. Cassian remained standing. His face showed internal war, decades of certainty battling against new possibility. Your Majesty, he said slowly, if we follow this path, if we allow the convergence to occur without trying to prevent it, we are risking everything. Not just ourselves, our children, our future, everything we have built across millennia. Yes, Isolde said simply, we are. And you believe this is correct. Isolde shook her head. I do not believe it is correct, Cassian. I believe it is necessary. There is a difference. Correct implies certainty. Necessary acknowledges that all paths carry risk, but some risks must be taken, or we cease to truly exist. She looked around the chamber again. I cannot see the outcome of this choice. My foresight shows me nothing beyond the convergence point. That terrifies me more than I can express. But I have learned in these past days that terror of the unknown is not reason enough to cling to a present that is slowly killing us. The chamber held silence that felt less like emptiness and more like a collective held breath. A civilization balanced on the edge of decision, uncertain which way the fall would take them. Then Elder Cassian did something Garrett had not expected. He knelt, not in surrender, in acceptance. Your Majesty, he said, I serve a Thari civilization. I have served through 3 queens across 2 centuries. I have seen decisions made from fear and decisions made from courage. And I have learned that the courageous decisions are always the ones that feel impossible until they are made. He stood slowly. I will support your choice. Not because I believe it will succeed, but because I believe the alternative is a failure we have been refusing to acknowledge. Other council members stood, one by one, not all of them, but enough. A majority formed not from certainty but from exhausted willingness to try something different. Isolde bowed her head briefly, acknowledgement of support that had been hard won and harder given. Then we have work to do, she said. 36 hours. We prepare our people not for prevention, but for transformation. We explain what is coming. We give them choice to shelter if they wish, or to remain present for whatever emerges. We document everything so that if we fail, others will at least know we tried something new. She looked at Garrett. Dr. Thorne, I will need your assistance. You understand human perspectives in ways we cannot. Help us prepare for uncertainty using models your species has developed. Garrett nodded. Humanity has considerable experience with chaos. We can share that knowledge. Good, Isolde said. She turned back to the council. We will reconvene in 4 hours. Bring proposals, not protests. Bring adaptability, not resistance. We have wasted enough time fighting change. Now we prepare to meet it. The council began to disperse, moving with purposeful energy that had been absent before. Crisis remained, but the paralysis of indecision had lifted. Isolde remained in the chamber center, Everin beside her. As the last council members departed, the Queen's shoulders sagged slightly, the weight she had been holding through sheer force of will settling onto her with visible pressure. Everin looked up at her mother. You chose me, the child said softly. I chose correctly, Isolde replied, though I am terrified I chose wrong. Everin's small hand tightened in her mother's. Both can be true, she said. You can be terrified and grateful, wrong and right. They do not cancel each other out. They just exist together. Isolde looked at her daughter with wonder. When did you become so wise? I have been seeing many timelines, Everin replied. In all of them, contradictions are normal. Only in our civilization do we pretend they are not. Isolde knelt to her daughter's level. Are you afraid? Yes, Everin said, but less afraid than I was before, when I was alone in the stasis field, when I could not see you. Isolde pulled her daughter close. I will never allow that again. I promise you. Whatever comes, we face it together. Garrett watched this moment, understanding that he was witnessing something more significant than political decision. He was seeing a mother reclaim her daughter from the machinery of civilization's survival. Seeing a queen choose love over duty and discovering they were not opposites after all. The 36 hours contracted with geometric intensity, time itself seeming to compress as the convergence approached. The city transformed around them. Where once the architecture had pulsed with predictable rhythms, now it moved with improvisation. Unexpected, spontaneous, live in ways it had not been for centuries. Citizens responded with a spectrum of reactions. Some retreated to shelters, seeking whatever protection control could still provide. Others emerged into the streets, gathering in plazas to watch the sky shift through colors that had no names in their language. Garrett worked alongside a Thari scientist sharing human theories of chaos, mathematics, adaptive systems, resilience through flexibility. They learned from each other, building understanding across the bridge of shared uncertainty. Isolde moved through the city, visible, accessible. A queen walking among her people rather than observing from palace heights. She spoke with those who were terrified, listened to those who were angry, acknowledged those who believed she had chosen wrongly. I cannot promise we will survive this, she told them. I cannot promise transformation will not bring pain. But I can promise that we will face what comes with honesty rather than denial, with adaptation rather than rigid resistance. And that is something we have not tried before. Some were comforted, some were not, but all saw their queen present, sharing their fear, rather than demanding they bear it alone. Everin remained at her mother's side throughout. The child's visions continued, timelines fragmenting and reforming in her perception. But as the hours passed, Everin began to describe it differently. It is like music, she said to Garrett during a brief rest. Before I was trying to hear one melody. Now I hear harmony, many notes at once. It is overwhelming, but it is also beautiful. Garrett smiled. Your species has a gift for finding beauty in complexity. All species do, Everin replied. Some just forget how to look for it. The hours counted down. 30, 20, 10. The city's fluctuations intensified. Buildings phased between states. Citizens began reporting that they could see multiple versions of their neighbors, slightly different, occupying the same space simultaneously. 5 hours before convergence, the first miracle occurred. The three citizens who had died from temporal phasing began to reappear. Not alive as they had been, but not gone either. They existed in superposition, visible in certain light, tangible in certain moments. Changed, different, but present. Their families gathered around them, weeping, confused, grateful. Medical teams examined them with instruments that struggled to parse the readings. The dead, not dead, existed in quantum states, probability clouds, rather than fixed points. One of them spoke, her voice echoing strangely as if from multiple throats at once. "We are here," she said, "and elsewhere and nowhere. All true simultaneously. It does not hurt. It is just different." Isolde came to see them personally. She knelt before the woman who had spoken. "I am sorry," the queen said. "Sorry that my choice caused you to change without consent." The woman smiled, and the expression rippled across several versions of her face. "Your Majesty," she said, "we were already changing, slowly, narrowing. This is just faster, more obvious, perhaps more honest." 2 hours before convergence, Isolde turned to Garrett with an expression heavy with something she had been carrying silently. They stood together in a quiet corridor, away from the gathering crowds. "Dr. Thorne," she said quietly, "there is something you must know. When the convergence completes, if you remain here, the timeline desynchronization will be permanent. You will never return to Earth. Everyone you know will be centuries gone. This is not a temporary assignment. This is exile." Garrett met her eyes. "I know." "You know," Isolde's surprise was genuine. "How?" "I have been calculating the temporal mechanics," Garrett said. "The math is clear. The moment I chose to stay after the first deaths, I accepted this consequence. I just did not say it aloud because it would have made you feel responsible." "I am responsible," Isolde said. "No," Garrett corrected gently. "You gave me a choice. I made it. Those are different things." He looked toward where the city pulsed with uncertain beauty, where Everin stood watching the sky with fractured but wondering eyes. "I spent 36 years on Earth, never quite fitting. Always the observer, never the participant. Here I fit by not fitting. I belong by being the element that does not belong. That is worth losing the ability to go back to a place where I never truly arrived." Isolde's eyes glistened. "You are choosing exile. For us, for people you barely know." "I am choosing home," Garrett said. "For the first time in my life. That is not exile, that is arrival." Everin appeared then, tugging on Garrett's sleeve. "Come, it is almost time." The final hour arrived. Isolde stood in the central plaza with Everin, Garrett, and Elder Cassian. Around them, thousands of Aethari gathered, those who had chosen to be present for transformation rather than sheltering from it. The sky above had become a canvas of shifting probability, colors that existed and did not exist simultaneously, patterns that made sense from multiple perspectives at once. Everin's hand tightened in her mother's grip. "It is happening now," the child said. "All the timelines converging, not into one, into all, into both, into neither." The air thickened with presence. Garrett felt his own existence begin to blur at the edges, as though the boundaries that defined him as singular were becoming suggestions rather than rules. He looked at his hands, saw multiple versions of them occupying the same space. One scarred, one unscarred, one younger, one older, all equally real. Around them, the gathered Aethari began to experience the same phenomenon. Singular existences fracturing into multiplicity, individual timelines splitting and reweaving into tapestries of possibility. Some screamed, some laughed, some simply stood in wonder, watching themselves exist in states they had never imagined possible. Isolde felt it too. She saw herself as queen and as mother, as the ruler who chose certainty and as the one who chose change. All versions present all real, her. And in that moment of quantum superposition, she understood. The convergence was not destruction, it was expansion. The Aethari had spent centuries collapsing probability into singular paths, optimizing for one timeline, one future. They had become so singular that any additional possibility threatened to shatter them. But now forced to exist in multiplicity, they were learning to hold more than one truth at once, to be multiple things simultaneously, to embrace paradox rather than resolve it into false simplicity. The convergence reached its apex. Reality split, fractured, seemed to shatter into infinite prismatic pieces, and then reformed. Not as it had been, but as something new. The Athari existed now in quantum superposition. Not ghosts, not divided, but expanded, capable of holding multiple timelines, multiple possibilities, multiple truths within themselves simultaneously. The pain was intense, the adjustment brutal. But as the moments passed and existence stabilized into its new configuration, something unexpected emerged: relief. They had been holding themselves so tightly to singular paths that the release felt like exhaling after holding breath for centuries. Isolde looked down at Everin. The child's eyes remained fractured, but now she smiled. "I can see clearly now," Everin said. "Not one future, not trying to choose between them, just seeing them all as they are, as they could be, as they want to be." "Does it still hurt?" Isolde asked. "No," Everin said. "It feels like home." Around them, the gathered Aetheri began to emerge from the initial shock. They explored their new existence with tentative wonder, reaching out to touch objects that existed in multiple states, speaking with voices that harmonized with their own probability echoes. The city settled into its new rhythm, not the predictable pulse of before, but a complex pattern that allowed for variation, spontaneity, surprise. Cassian approached Isolde, and she saw him now as he was: elder and advisor, grieving father and protective leader, afraid and courageous, all at once, all true. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying multiple timbres, "I believe we have survived." "More than survived," Isolde replied. "We have grown." She looked at Garrett, saw him as human and as bridge, as outsider and as catalyst, as the variable that had forced them to change, and as the friend who had witnessed their transformation with respect. "You cannot return to Earth," she said quietly. "The timeline desynchronization is permanent. Centuries will have passed there. Everyone you knew will be gone." Garrett nodded. He had known this was coming, had felt it in the moment when reality split. "I know," he said, "but I have never felt more at home than I do right now. Strange to find home by losing the ability to return to where I came from." "Not so strange," Isolde said. "Home is not a place we return to. It is a state we create by choosing to belong." Everin pulled on Garrett's sleeve. "Come with us. We need to check on everyone. Make sure the transformation was not too hard for them." They walked together through the plaza, queen and daughter and human advisor, moving among people who existed in states of beautiful complexity, learning to navigate existence that held multiplicity as feature rather than flaw. It would take time to adjust. There would be losses. Some Aetheri had not survived the transition, their singular existence unable to fragment without breaking entirely. Those deaths would be mourned, honored, remembered as the cost of transformation that came too late for them. But the majority had survived, had expanded, had become something their ancestors would not have recognized but might have envied. 6 months passed in patterns that no longer followed linear progression. Time itself had become more fluid, more willing to accommodate multiple simultaneously existing durations. Queen Isolde still ruled, but governance had transformed. Decisions were no longer made by selecting singular optimal paths. Instead, the Athari explored multiple approaches simultaneously, allowing reality to follow whichever threads proved most viable. Elder Cassian remained her primary advisor, though he now spent significant time working with the families of those who had died in the convergence, helping them grieve, helping them understand, finding meaning in loss that could never be truly justified, but could at least be witnessed with compassion. The city had settled into its new configuration: architecture that breathed with complexity, streets that existed in multiple states, allowing travelers to experience different versions of the same journey, buildings that phased between possibilities, offering spaces for whatever use was needed in that particular probability thread. Citizens adapted with varying degrees of ease. The younger Aetheri, more flexible in their perception, thrived. The elders struggled more but persisted, learning slowly to release their grip on singular existence. Trade with other civilizations had become complicated. Species unaccustomed to quantum superposition found Aethari space disorienting, but adaptations were being developed. Interface zones where probability collapsed into more singular states, allowing for communication and commerce with less flexible realities. Garrett had become permanent advisor on uncertainty management. He helped develop protocols for navigating existence that refused to settle into predictable patterns. His human perspective, trained by a species that had never possessed foresight, proved invaluable. He found satisfaction in the work. Purpose in helping a civilization learn to embrace what his own people had always known, that uncertainty was not the enemy of life, but its fundamental condition. He missed Earth occasionally, missed the specificity of singular timeline. But those moments grew less frequent as his new existence became familiar. Evren thrived. Her visions no longer fragmented her consciousness because consciousness itself had learned to exist in fragments without breaking. She drew occasionally, but the images now were just pictures. The future had stopped demanding to be invoked through her art. She played with other children, learning to navigate multiplicity as native to her experience, teaching the adults in the way children often did, how to move through new realities with grace. One evening, as the sky cycled through its probability patterns, Evren found Garrett in his workspace. She carried a new drawing. "I made this for you," she said. Garrett accepted the paper. The image showed three figures: Queen Isolde, Princess Evren, Dr. Garrett Thorne, standing together in the palace's central plaza, not in any particular future, just in a present that existed across multiple timelines. "What is this?" Garrett asked, though he thought he understood. "My family," Evren said simply. "The one I chose, the one Mother protected, the one you helped become real." Garrett felt something catch in his chest. He had spent 36 years believing family was something defined by genetic connection or legal documentation. But here in this impossible place among people who existed in quantum states, he had found family defined differently, by choice, by presence, by the willingness to witness each other's becoming without demanding it conform to expectation. "Thank you," he said quietly. Evren smiled and ran off to find her mother, her laughter echoing across multiple probability threads simultaneously. Garrett placed the drawing on his workspace, looked at it for a long moment, then returned to his work helping a civilization learn to dance with uncertainty rather than fight it. That night, Queen Isolde stood on the palace balcony, watching her city pulse with complex rhythms. Evren appeared beside her, wrapping small arms around her mother's waist. "Do you regret it?" Evren asked, choosing change over safety. Isolde considered the question honestly. "Every moment I am terrified, and every moment I am grateful." "Both can be true," Evren said, repeating the wisdom she had spoken months ago. "Yes," Isolde agreed, "both can be true. That is what we learned. That paradox is not problem to solve, but reality to accept." They stood together in comfortable silence, mother and daughter, queen and princess, past and future existing simultaneously in the eternal complexity of the present moment. Garrett joined them after a while, stepping onto the balcony with the ease of someone who belonged there. "The council wants to establish formal records of the convergence," he said. "They want to document everything so that future generations understand what happened, what we chose." "What should we tell them?" Isolde asked. Garrett smiled. "Tell them the truth, that we faced a choice between certainty and life, between control and growth. And we chose to live even when living meant releasing our grip on safety." "Will they understand?" Evren asked. "Some will," Garrett said. "Others will not, but understanding is not required for truth to be true." Isolde looked at the drawing Evren had made, which the child now held up for her mother to see. Three figures, standing together, not in any predicted future, just in the present they had chosen to create. "This is perfect," Isolde said softly. "This is exactly what we are." She took her daughter's hand, reached out her other hand to Garrett. The three of them stood connected, watching a city learn to exist in beautiful complexity. "For the first time since becoming queen," Isolde said, "I do not wonder what the future holds. I simply hold what is now, and that is enough." Below them, the city pulsed with life that refused to be contained in singular definitions. Citizens moved through streets that existed in multiple states at once, Buildings breathed with the rhythm of possibility. And in the palace, three people stood together, proof that family could be chosen, that change could be survived, and that uncertainty was not the end of meaning, but its beginning. The story had reached its conclusion, not with answers, not with certainty, but with something more valuable, with the courage to exist in questions, to live in the space between knowing and unknowing, to choose connection over safety and growth over control. The future remained unknowable, but for the first time in 8 centuries, the Athari did not fear that unknowing. They embraced it. And in that embrace, they found not the end they had feared, but the beginning they had never imagined possible. Queen Isolde looked at the drawing her daughter had made, not of destiny, not of prophecy, just of love, rendered in simple lines on simple paper. And for the first time since the demons that had brought Dr. Garrett Thorne across the stars, she did not wonder what came next. She simply stood in what was now. And that was enough. That was everything. That was home.